Hello and welcome. Please take a seat, get cozy and enjoy a cup of terror with me, Stefanie Valentine, and my cute little moo friend. Oh, I love her. She's so cute. Hello, my spooky little pumpkins. How are we all? I hope you've all been keeping well. So, a few weeks ago, we went to see the new Conjuring movie. The Conjuring, the devil made me do it. And a case was mentioned in it that made me, just kind of piqued my interest, and I really wanted to look into it. Michael Taylor and his alleged demonic possession. So, got home, had a look at the case, and I knew I had to do a video on it. So interesting. Now, warning, there are some really horrible graphic details in this video. This case is said to be the most shocking account of demonic possession to have ever occurred in the UK. And there is also a description of animal violence as well, if you don't like that sort of thing. So this case takes place in the small market town of Ossett in West Yorkshire, England. It's a normal sort of place, until the tragic events of 1974, which shocked and gripped the nation. Michael Taylor was born on the 21st of September 1944 in Ossett. At the time of the events, he was 31 years old and living with his 29-year-old wife, Christine, their 5 children, and their family dog, a poodle. Not much is known about Michael's early life, but he was said to be a mild-mannered man, easygoing, kind, a loving and devoted family man and husband. He was well respected by those around him and he seemed happy and content. He had suffered a back injury a few years prior and he'd been dealing with chronic pain, and at times it affected his ability to work. Now, Britain was going through a recession at this time, and this, along with a back injury, meant that he struggled to find long-term employment. The pressure would affect Michael and he suffered with bouts of depression. Other than that, though, there was no indication that anything strange or unusual was happening with him. Now, the Taylors weren't particularly religious, but a friend of Michael's, Barbara Wardman, she thought it might help his depression if he were to attend a church group called the Gorber Christian Fellowship Group. Now, Michael and Christine, they went along to a house meeting and they were so impressed that they quickly converted to Christianity. The house meetings were led by 22-year-old lay preacher Marie Robinson. Now, some of Michael's friends, they believed that his depression had actually eased with this spiritual intervention. Michael really took to the church and he became heavily involved in church activities. The Taylor's house was even used as an additional venue for the house meetings. He started spending more and more time with Marie. They'd attend meetings and gatherings together. They would even use the power of God to exorcise people of their sins, and they would speak in tongues, which, for those that may not know, it's when people utter seemingly incomprehensible words and sounds when they're kind of in the middle of a religious trance, and they believe that they're channeling a divine being, they're channeling the Holy Spirit. Michael and Marie would also take part in private rituals in which they'd stay up all night during a full moon, making the sign of the cross at each other to ward off the evil power and evil intentions of the full moon. Michael's behaviour and demeanour soon changed, and not for the better. At home, he was irritable, grumpy. He was often causing arguments with his family. This version of Michael was completely different to the Michael before he joined the church group. His beliefs were becoming increasingly bizarre and he was behaving erratically. Christine was becoming very concerned about the amount of time that Michael and Marie were spending together, and She suspected that there was more than a professional relationship happening. During one of the house meetings that were held at their home, Christine decided to speak up. She said that the situation was not right and that things needed to be resolved. And she suggested that Michael and Marie be left alone for a little while to kind of resolve this issue. Once they were alone, Michael admitted his feelings for Marie. Marie did not feel the same about Michael. In fact, she was quite shocked by this revelation. She told him that it was wrong and that he loved Christine. When Christine and other members of the congregation joined them, Michael declared, "We have won a great victory for the Lord. A miracle has happened. We have both overcome our passions." I think he was trying to style it out, pretend that he hadn't just been rejected by this young lady that he fancied. And now all the other churchgoers knew about the situation, knew that he liked her, and maybe he realised how embarrassing and humiliating it all was, because his behaviour, his temperament soon changed. Marie said that he looked almost bestial. There was a wild look in his eyes. She started screaming. Michael started screaming. There was a whole lot of screaming going on. And then Michael started slapping her face repeatedly. He grabbed her hair and he threw her across the room. He continued attacking Marie and he was strangling her, shouting at her in tongues. Marie said that she thought that she was going to die. This was going to be it, that Michael was going to kill her. Other members of the congregation, they managed to restrain Michael and pull him away, leaving Marie battered and bruised. Michael later claimed that an evil influence came over him, and he also claimed to have no memory of this incident. Despite this violent outburst and attack, Michael was forgiven, and Marie even came round the next day to see him. So the Christian Fellowship Group, this was a part of St. Thomas's Anglican Church in Barnsley, which is not too far from Ossett. St. Thomas was led by Reverend Peter Vincent. I got very excited when I read this. If you're a fan of Fright Night, you will know why. I was like, Peter Vincent. Sadly, this Peter Vincent in this case, he's not as nice. He's definitely not as cool. It's a real shame. So the Reverend, he heard about the attack, and he and his wife, Sally Vincent, they popped round to see the Taylors. Now, Michael, he told them that Marie tried to seduce him in front of his wife and that she had somehow caused him to become possessed by the devil. Naughty Michael, I think someone's pants are on fire. Just because she turned him down, it doesn't mean that he should have this hissy fit and blame her for the demonic possession. It's kind of typical sort of behaviour like that. Now, Michael's behaviour over the next couple of weeks, he was becoming more and more alarming. His sanity seemed to be slipping. He reacted violently to anything associated with religion, like crosses and Bibles. He wanted them all thrown out of the house. He knelt in the street outside the house and he was shouting. He told neighbours that he had seen the devil, and he was still very afraid of the moon and the evil influence that the full moon could bring. Michael was really losing his mind. Peter Vincent heard all of this, and he was convinced that this was all down to demonic forces. Now, one thing that you should know about Peter Vincent is that he really liked performing exorcisms. He was an avid exorcist. He described them as wonderful. I think he probably needed to find a different hobby. So the Reverend made the controversial decision that an exorcism should be performed on Michael. On the night of the 5th of October 1974, Michael and Christine, they were invited over to the vicarage. Now, the Reverend had brought together a group of people to assist with the exorcism. Reverend Raymond Smith and his wife Peggy, Donald James, who was another lay preacher, and of course his wife Sally was there. They told Michael that they believed that he had demonic spirits possessing him, and not surprisingly, Michael reacted badly to this. When the vicarage cat came into the room, he smashed his plate, he screamed at the cat, and then he started attacking it and then threw it out of the house. So the others said the exorcism has to be done right away. Something was not right with Michael, and they were expecting it to be an arduous task and one that would take all night probably. At midnight, they took Michael to the church vestry, and with Reverend Peter Vincent and Reverend Raymond Smith leading the ritual, and with some of the congregation present, they began the exorcism. Michael experienced uncontrollable fits and convulsions. They had to restrain him, and then it got to a point where they had to tie him down to the floor because he was violently struggling. He was trying to scratch and bite anyone that got near him. Over the course of the next 7 hours, Michael had to endure all sorts of humiliating and mortifying acts, such as having to confess to sins that he was completely innocent of, having a crucifix forced into his mouth, and holy water thrown all over him. At one point, they even burned a wooden cross that he was wearing. The clergyman claimed to have exorcised 40 demonic spirits from Michael, such as incest, lewdness, blasphemy, bestiality, heresy, and masochism. By 7 o'clock in the morning, they had to stop because everyone was exhausted. However, there were 3 demons still inhabiting Michael's body: insanity, violence, and murder. The group decided that they needed a little break before getting rid of the last of the stubborn demons. So they told everyone to go home, have a nap, and then they'll continue with the exorcism after they'd all had some rest. Apparently one of the members of the congregation, a minister's wife called Margaret Smith, she said that she received a warning from God. Like the thought popped into her head that the demon of murder was going to escape from Michael and kill Christine. Apparently she begged the priests to finish the exorcism, but they refused, and they told everyone that they needed to go home and rest, and unfortunately, Margaret's warning would soon become a horrific reality. So a family friend of the Taylors, they took Christine and Michael back home, and they also took the children away to stay with their grandparents for a few hours while their parents rested and tried to recover from their ordeal. At around 10 o'clock that morning, the 7th of October, only a couple of hours after the Taylors had returned home, the Ossett police began receiving phone calls describing a naked man kind of wandering around the streets covered in paint. PC Ian Walker, who had just clocked on to his shift that morning, he thought it was just a practical joke, someone being silly, maybe someone who'd got drunk the night before and was now kind of stumbling home. So he and his partner headed out to investigate this call. They soon found the man, and it was Michael Taylor. He was laid down on the footpath, curled up in the fetal position. They got out of the car and slowly approached him. PC Walker quickly realised that it wasn't paint that this man was covered in. It was blood. Blood all over his head and arms and body. PC Walker searched for a wound on the man's body, but he couldn't seem to find anything. So Walker talked to Michael. He asked him questions, trying to find out what happened. Michael was shaking, weeping, struggling to talk. Eventually, he told the policeman, "They primed me for it last night. They tried to bring me peace of mind, but instead, they filled me with the devil." Walker was filled with a sense of dread. He quickly realised that he may have assumed wrong, thinking that the blood that covered Michael was his own. He asked Michael what he meant by what he just said, like, what did they do? Michael answered, "It was within her. Oh God, it used her. It used my love. I destroyed the evil within her. It had to be done. Oh hell, I loved that woman. No, no, please God, no. Please God." Walker asked Michael whose blood this was. "It was the blood of Satan," he replied. Michael continued to lie on the ground, chanting over and over again, "It is the blood of Satan. It is the blood of Satan. It is the blood of Satan." An ambulance soon arrived and Michael was taken away. PC Walker now quickly made his way to the Taylor's house. He was surprised to find a patrol car there already. The police had actually been called out after a frightened neighbour called them up saying that they heard a commotion and they were quite scared. A detective inspector came out of the house and he bent over and he vomited. He insisted that Michael should not go in, but Walker's pride and curiosity got the better of him. He'd seen a lot of things in his time as a police officer, so he thought, I can handle it. But he soon regretted stepping into that house and seeing the gruesome scene that laid before him. He just about made out Christine's lifeless body spread out on the floor. The entire room was covered with blood, chunks of flesh and meat. Here, around 10 a.m. that morning in their once warm and loving family home, Michael had viciously and horrifically murdered the woman he loved. He stripped off all of his clothing first of all, and then he started his attack. He had ripped out her eyes, gouging them out of her skull. He had literally ripped off her flesh, ripped off her face, ripped off her skin. Like literally there was nothing left on her skull. And he had also ripped out her tongue. He had mutilated her face to the point that she was left unrecognisable. She had no face left. Christine had died from shock and asphyxiation on her own blood. It is said that she died quickly, which is some tiny comfort, I suppose, but what a horrific and painful way to die, suffocating on your own blood. Even after he had killed Christine and mutilated her face, Michael wasn't done. He moved on to the family dog, the poodle. He grabbed the dog, strangled it to death, and tore off all of its limbs from their sockets. In a similar fashion to Christine, he also tore the dog's hair, teeth, and eyes from the skull. He then left the house screaming, and that's when people saw him and called in to the police. And soon after that, PC Walker found him. One other thing that the police noted was that they couldn't find a murder weapon. They soon realised that Michael, he had not used a weapon. He had done all of that with his bare hands. Later on that day, when Michael was in police custody and being interviewed, he told Detective Inspector Brian Smith about the exorcism. He said, "It was a long night. They danced around me and burned my cross because that was tainted with the evil. They had me in the church all night. Look at my hands. I was banging on the floor. The power was in me. I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could they. They were too late. I was compelled by a force within me to destroy everything living within the house." When asked how he felt, Michael replied, "Released. I am released. It is done. The evil in her has been destroyed." He claimed that he couldn't remember the actual murder, that he had no recollection of it. Michael Taylor was charged with the murder of his wife, Christine Taylor, and he was sent to Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire to await trial. The trial began in March 1975. He claimed that after the exorcism, he believed that Christine had also become possessed by demons, and he was acting under the influence of demonic supernatural forces. Once again, he reiterated the fact that he had no recollection of the actual murder and that he deeply loved his wife. His defence claimed that the Christian Fellowship group was more of a cult. It had filled Michael's mind with religious propaganda and indoctrination, influencing his mind and messing with his already existing mental issues. An inquest was ordered into the events on the night of the 5th of November 1974, the night of the exorcism. During the inquest, the consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Milne, claimed that the exorcism was entirely related to his trance state that morning and his eventual killing of his wife. He believed that it was all linked up. And it was believed that all of these ideals and beliefs that Michael had been fed by the group, and then the ritual itself, it took a toll on an already mentally disturbed man, and this just sent him over the edge. The jury found Michael Taylor not guilty of the murder of his wife by reason of insanity. He was sent to Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital for 2 years, and then he spent another 2 years at a secure ward at Bradford Royal Infirmary before being released, supposedly cured. Not surprisingly, the public were outraged that the church still allowed the practice of exorcisms. The Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, he condemned the actions of the fellowship group, but exorcisms are still sanctioned and still happening to this very day. Now, the 2 clergymen who led the ritual, they obviously didn't suffer any sort of blame for what happened. Reverend Peter Vincent, he had no remorse at all for the suffering that his actions caused. He continued to insist that this was a genuine demonic possession and that it was necessary to exorcise those demons out of Michael's body. When asked about what happened that night and the subsequent horrors that occurred the next day, he simply replied with, "God will bring good out of this in his own way." And in another act of disrespect, his career wasn't even affected. Even though the nation was outraged at what he had done, he received a promotion the following year from priest in charge to vicar, which is very annoying, to say the least. It was only Reverend Raymond Smith who showed some form of, I don't know if remorse is the right word to use, but he admitted that they probably didn't handle it in the best way, In fact, on the night of the exorcism, when the Taylors first got there and Michael had a reaction to Peter Vincent telling him that he was possessed, Reverend Smith was actually a little doubtful of Peter Vincent's diagnosis, and he wanted to actually consult a doctor first. The others in the group thought that calling the medical services might make the situation worse, so he left it. But, can you imagine how different things might have been if Michael was taken to a hospital where they could have properly treated him? That poor family and those poor kids might have not had to go through all of that. So what happened to Michael Taylor? Well, it is reported that he went back to Ossett to live there, which is quite unimaginable, really. Going back to the place where all those horrific things happened. Oh, I couldn't do it. He continued to suffer with depression, though, and he made a total of 4 suicide attempts over the following years. In July 2005, he was arrested for sexually harassing and indecently touching an underage girl. He spent a week in custody, and during this time, he began showing the same strange behaviour that he had exhibited in 1975. He was brought back before the court for the trial, and they deemed him to be a low to medium risk for reoffending, so he got off with a pretty light sentence of 3 years community service, but they also ordered him to receive psychiatric treatment. So that is the horrible and disturbing case of the Ossett possession and murder. It's worth remembering that before joining this church group, Michael was happy. He was seemingly normal. He had a great marriage. He loved his kids. Like, nothing seemed wrong. He wasn't religious. They didn't go to church, but soon after joining this group and then experiencing some rather intense moments, he was soon running around, shouting at the moon and seeing the devil. So were there really demons possessing Michael's body? I can't say. Who knows? There may have been, but he may have just been kind of tipped over the edge by the exorcism. His mind was already in a really fragile state, and exorcisms are intense. I mean, can you just imagine that? Like 7-8 hours of being shouted at, forced to admit things that you haven't done, and crosses being shoved in your mouth, and all sorts of shouting and scary things happening. Like, that is such an intense situation, and I think most people would be affected by that. So I think this is a very mysterious and even unexplained case. I'm not a medical professional, and I don't feel it's my place to kind of say what sort of mental health issues Michael was dealing with, but it is such a shame that he wasn't taken to a medical professional, and it probably would have prevented this tragedy. This case, it really got to me when I was researching it, more so than the other ones I've done so far. And it's not as if it's the most graphic case I've looked into or the most violent thing I've read about, but I don't know, really. It really stuck with me and did kind of scare me a little bit. Maybe it was the added element of the supernatural and possession and exorcisms that really made it creepy. I've seen some real life footage of exorcisms, and there's something else. It just seemed like they have to mentally break the person though, and I feel like that's what happened with Michael. I feel like they did break him down. His head had been filled with all of these beliefs, and there was already some mental health issues that he was dealing with, and then the horrible experience of the exorcism and the things that they put him through, it just exacerbated what he was suffering with, and then he was just sent over the edge. There's a lot you can discuss with this case. First of all, religion and exorcisms, should they be allowed still? And how much was his religious indoctrination to blame for what happened? And then you have Michael's health, mental health. I mean, this is the 70s. I mean, I don't know how well it would have been understood or taken seriously. I don't know, but still, there would have been some hope of helping him heal, instead of transforming him into this crazed murderer. I think what freaks me out the most is the fact that he was so loving and nice and normal. He had a great family life. There was, no instances in the past which would have given them any sort of warning of what was to come. He had a great relationship with his wife. He had a great relationship with his kids. And I know that, often murderers do come across as pretty regular people, but often there will be various incidences in the past which will give you some sort of hint that maybe something was not quite right. Whereas with Michael, there was never any violence, there was never any anger, anything like that. So I don't know, the fact that the mind can be so easily affected is quite scary. The thought that an incident like that could just set you off, and that you could kill someone in such a horrific way, gives me the shivers. The human mind is so fragile. It's incredible, but then it can be so easily affected, and then You have to think, is 4 years enough for a man to be rehabilitated and then cured enough to be let out into society? I mean, considering what he did, 4 years seems like nothing. And he was still suffering. He attempted suicide 4 times. You know, I don't know. I hope the 5 children were able to get help for the horrifying experiences that they went through. I don't know how much they knew at the time. Obviously, they would have known everything once they grew up, and then losing a parent like that must be so traumatizing. I suppose they lost 2 parents, really. You know, their relationship with their father, I'm pretty sure it would have been, you know, well, I don't know if they even had any kind of contact with him after, but, you know, it's never going to be the same, is it? Before I end this video, I'm going to leave you with a quote from PC Ian Walker, the policeman who found Michael Taylor, as I think it quite succinctly encapsulates how many people would have felt at the time. Of all the incidents in which I was involved in 30 years of police work, nothing affected me like this one. The stupidity and futility of it all, the complete and utter waste of life and destruction of a family, not to mention the death and other traumas, are far beyond anything else I have ever come across. Obviously, my wife asked questions, but there are some things that you do not take home, and this was one of them. However, within the next 24 to 48 hours, the news hit the national newspapers and the TV news bulletins. You just bury it and get on with your life as best you can. Before this event, I was agnostic, and now I was an atheist. And with that, I shall say goodbye and see you next time.